Okay, great. So let's get started. We're going to be talking today about resumes and networking. But first, I'd just like to share a little bit about myself so that you understand that I do have some expertise in this area. I I got a bachelor's in psychology and then a master's in counseling. And then I have worked for 5 different colleges and universities doing career planning, recruiting, graduate school advising. So I've been in this business for 48 years. And I'm still doing it in retirement. I have a little part-time job with Vassar College working with their alumni. So I have a broad perspective on a lot of these issues. And in coming into this, my guess is that many of you possibly submitted a resume when you applied to AmeriCorps, and I would guess that most of you have resumes. So we're going to go over some things that I think are helpful to know so that you can improve the document that you already have and have it working better for you. What I'd like you to do is hold questions to either ask at the end or put them in the chat. Because sometimes when a person asks a question, it turns into a little mini discussion and then we kind of get off track and don't get to finish everything. So I'd like it if you could hold them to the end. So um, let's talk about the required sections of a resume. You should have a letterhead. It can be centered, it could be on the right, it could be on the left. The position on the page doesn't matter. But one thing about letterheads that has been happening over the last couple of years or so, is that resume writers don't put their street addresses on the resumes anymore. You still can if you wish to, but many people are leaving off street address because of privacy issues. However, you may want to let an employer know where you are geographically, particularly if you are applying for jobs that are at a distance from where you live. Sometimes employers make decisions based on where you live, thinking to themselves, is this person really going to relocate from Portland, Maine to Salt Lake City, Utah? Probably best for me not to spend time on this individual. So if you want to be in a certain location, you would strategically either not list anything about where you live, or if you are in a certain area, you want the employer to know that, you can still put the state, you can still put the city, but most people will leave off street address and zip code. And again, it's perfectly acceptable if you decide to include that information. There's nothing wrong with it. Also, obviously, you want to have your name. It should be the largest thing on the page. It should be slightly larger than your section headings. And you would, of course, list a phone number and an email address. And many people these days are including a link to their LinkedIn profile, which is a good thing to do. But before you do that, make sure that your LinkedIn profile is at its best. If you, many of you who have had a college experience can return to your alma mater or to the college that you attended and contact their career development office. You should be able to schedule an appointment with someone to look over resumes and to look over your LinkedIn profile to make sure that you're marketing yourself in the best possible way. I would say, I would venture to say, all colleges, with perhaps maybe 1% exception, say they serve their alumni population without charge. So you should be able to go back and get some support if you need that and someone to take a look at that profile. On the LinkedIn profile, also upload your resume to that profile. I know that all of the sections that you fill out on LinkedIn, they look very much like your resume, and some people leave it at that. But it's a good idea to also upload the resume so that the employer can download it if they wish to. Okay, so that can also go in the letterhead. The next thing I don't have here for some reason would be either an objective or a professional summary. Objectives are not in vogue these days, but they are helpful if you are changing career direction. It's good to make that manifest in an objective to indicate that you're moving, you're transitioning from marketing into human resources so that the employer sees that information right away. And also, what has pretty much replaced objectives is a professional summary where you're giving a snapshot of who you are professionally and your dominant skills in relation to the job that you are applying for. You can either do it in just brief phrases in more of a paragraph style, or you can do a bulleted style, but you don't want to have more than 5 phrases in there. You don't want it to be too long. Okay. The next is your education section, which if you are still in college or if you are a recent graduate, and that's usually defined as 2 to 3 years out, generally your education goes first on the page. If you've been out longer than that, the education drops to a lower point on the page because it's not your primary qualification. Okay, so education, you want to have the name of the organization and the city and state where it's located. You want to put your graduation month and year. Usually you don't have to put your dates of attendance. What the person is most interested in is when did you graduate? You also want to put the degree that you receive. It could be Bachelor of Arts, it could be Bachelor of Science. And if you have 2 degrees, you want to list the most recent first. Everything in a resume goes in reverse chronological order. So after you've identified the school, city, and state, you would indicate your degree and your major. Okay. And then you can also indicate coursework. If you are going to indicate coursework, you would want to indicate the coursework that is directly related to the position that you're applying for. Okay. And sometimes if you lack sufficient experience for the job that you're applying for, that you may have some experience that was in your courses. You may have done some research. You may have done an extensive paper that was within for a course requirement. So a person can either put a list of courses or they can indicate course projects that they have been involved in. Obviously, when you're listing courses, you just list the titles of the course. You don't need the numbers of the course. I've seen people put the course number on the resume, which means nothing to the employer. You just put the titles of the courses. If you're going to identify some projects, instead of having coursework as your section heading, you would say course projects. You would put the name of the course, a dash, and then describe the project that you were involved with. Okay, so that coursework, I have it under required sections, but it's not necessarily required if you have a breadth and length of experience qualifying you for the position. Or it's also helpful if you are changing career direction and you've had some coursework in the, direction that you're changing to. It can be useful there. Okay. Another required section is experience. Okay. This can be, when you use the word experience, if you just say experience on your resume, experience can mean a job that was paid. It could be a volunteer experience. It could be a club or activity that you participated in, because the generic term is experience. If you use the word employment, then that section would only have positions for which you were paid. Obviously, you need to put the name of the employer, the city and state, the dates that you were employed there. When you're putting a date, use the month year date instead of just the year. I see a lot of people saying that they worked from 2020 to 2022. The implication or the assumption with that is that you worked January 1st of that time period to December 31st of the end time period. If you didn't work, for those dates, then the information is inaccurate. Also, using dates alone is a strategy people use to hide periods of unemployment. So some employers will look at that and say, I wonder if, they really worked that long or if there was a period of unemployment in there. Okay. So I would prefer that and advise that you use the month, year. And also, um, back in the day, you used to write out the whole month, and then people started abbreviating their months. Now, what I see most often is a three-letter abbreviation with no period. So JUN, JAN, MAY, obviously, because it only has, three letters. So it would be JUN 19, I'm sorry, 19, showing you how old I am, 2024 dash January to 25. Okay, so that's how you would indicate the dates. Then you want to describe your experience in brief phrases that start with action verbs. If you are uncertain about what action verbs to use, if you Google active verbs for resumes, you're going to get a list of action verbs. Um, you will, believe me, they're all out there so that you can look for the action word that describes what you're trying to indicate in that section. The nice thing about those lists is when you look through them, they also remind you of certain things that you've done. So those action word lists can be really helpful for developing this section. So starting with an active verb and, indicating the activity that you have been involved in. We don't want to use personal pronouns ever on resumes. They're not appropriate. Sometimes that can make your phrases sound a little stilted, but that's okay. I refer to that as resume speak. Employers understand that. So don't worry about not putting in personal pronouns. Um, with your experience, you also want to focus on accomplishments. You want to tell the employer some things a good way to look at it is how did you leave this job better than you found it? Did you create something new? Did you reorganize something? Did you improve something? Um, if you can quantify as much as possible, that's also very helpful. Saying that you facilitated workshops and saying that you facilitated 30 workshops um, gives a different impression. Even with part-time jobs and volunteer jobs, a lot of resumes that I've seen of people who have waited tables, will just say that they served customers, they waited tables. But once I saw a student who put down that they served 10 tables simultaneously during a very active dinner rush. That allows the employer to really get this mental picture of you running yourself ragged, to take care of 8 or to 10 tables, during the busiest time that restaurant is open. So see if you can quantify as much as possible when you're describing your experiences. Okay. Another required section is skills, and you want to include any languages that you have experience in as well. Some people will use skills as their section heading. Others will have separate sections for technology or for languages if they have a lot that they have to put into those sections. But most of us will put skills and then have little subsections for languages, technology, and other categories of skills. Um, with technology skills, don't assume that that certain things are standard. A lot of people will say to me, well, I know Microsoft's, suite. Why should I say anything else about that? I say, well, for two reasons. If you say Microsoft Office suite, the assumption is that you know everything in that suite. If you don't, then you really need to specify Microsoft Word, Excel, etc. The other reason for putting like all those things in there specifically is that a lot of organizations are using applicant tracking systems, and the applicant tracking systems look for specific keywords. So if I really want someone, who knows Excel, that's the term that the system is going to look for. Okay. Um, and for languages, you can um, you can give some sense of what your skill level is. Typically, it's elementary, intermediate, advanced, and expert. Now, there are tests that you can take that give you, I think there's a federal government test that's probably the best one for languages, but there are other language tests out there that if you take it, they will give you descriptors that you can use on your resume. If you're not, if you can't speak or read, but you have some familiarity with a language, I think it's a good idea to list that as well. Okay. And I forgot to mention, sorry, under education, is that if you have had a study abroad experience, it's important that you indicate that on your resume. I do see a lot of resumes, and when I'm reviewing them with people, I will always ask, did you do an abroad? Yeah, I did. I'm like, it's not on here. We need to get that on here. Even if you're not intending to use that experience in the job that you're applying for, study abroad experiences really do a lot to broaden people's perspective, to give them experience with different cultures and different places. It's an experience where you have to adjust to a new way of living, living without your family, living with an international family, perhaps, getting accustomed to a new language. So there are a lot of benefits to that experience that employers realize and value, actually. Okay. Okay, so optional sections on your resume, you can include any honors or awards that you have received. And just a little note about GPAs. A 3.5 is generally the break point for indicating your GPA on your resume. Um, but you can also indicate your overall GPA and your GPA in your major. I don't know about all of you, but my GPA in my major was a lot higher than my overall GPA because those were the courses I was excited about and put a lot of effort and energy into. So I put my overall GPA and I put my major GPA in there. When you say major GPA, what you're implying is all of the courses that you had to take to fulfill your major. So as a psychology major, I had to take some non-psychology courses that were related to psych. But if I say, that this is my major GPA, that includes everything. If I say this is my GPA for my psychology courses, then that's a different number that you can cite. In other words, look for the bright spots in your academic history and point to those on the resume. My sister did a lot of adjusting to college during her first 2 years, but her last 2 years, she really did well. So on her resume, she put her GPA for her last 4 semesters. And that was the bright spot that she was able to point to. I, sorry, I forgot that when I was talking about education. So let's go on, go back to the optional sections. The honors and awards are important to put in. If you have graduated uh, um, cum laude, magna cum laude, or summa cum laude, the appropriate way to cite that is in all lowercase and italics. Okay, that is the Latin way to format those honors. And most colleges have the Latin honors, but some don't. There are some colleges that simply do college honors and departmental honors. So if you have those honors, then you need to list those. And other awards you should list in the education session, you would list your academically related awards, and that might be a scholarship or an academic prize. If it is recognizable by most people, some of the larger academic societies like Phi Beta Kappa or Psi Chi, people would know what you're talking about. But if it's an award that most people would not recognize, it's okay to give a brief descriptor. And it's also okay to give a brief descriptor for, academic prizes. If the academic prize was for the student with the highest grade point average in English, you can list that, because sometimes prizes bear the names of alums who have established those prizes. So the Deidre Sepp Prize, if you just put that, nobody's going to know what that means. There is no such prize, but if there were such a prize, it would probably be something related to psychology. So it's a good idea to explain those. Okay. Activities is another section that is important but optional. And activities, of course, can be athletics, both collegiate, intercollegiate and intramural. Activities can be clubs and organizations. It can be student government. It can be volunteer experiences either on campus or in the local community. So those are important to list as well. And you put the name of the organization that you were affiliated with. If you held a leadership role like a president or secretary, you would want to indicate that as well. And if you've got room on the resume, you can, usually do one line, possibly two lines of the way you were involved in that organization and some of the activities that you were connected with. Okay. Um, Objective summary. Oh, I did have that, but just didn't have it up at the top. Personal interests, I don't see it anymore. I haven't seen it for about 10 years now on resumes. Back in the day, we used to list our hobbies and our interests. I would only say to do something like that if it is definitely connected with the job that you're applying for. And also travel experiences. If you are applying for a position for which travel would be something that they really value, and you've had that study abroad experience, but or not, and you've also had personal travel experience, it can be a good idea to list those travel experiences on the resume. Okay. So let's see where I go. Where do I go from here? Okay. Yes. Um, Things to consider. Templates are easy to set up, but very difficult to edit when you need to. I am not a fan of templates. I think it's worth the time to set up your own format so that you can put the sections that you want in, you can put them where you want to, and when it comes time to edit, it's much easier to do so. Okay. Tailoring your resume is very important. Ideally, in a perfect world, you would do a separate resume for each position that you applied for. Obviously, if there were differences in the positions, you would really concentrate on who that employer is, what they might be looking for, setting it up to appeal to that organization particularly. We can't do that because it takes a lot of time and energy, but it is good to do as much tailoring to the job and the organization as you possibly can. And for those of you who might be looking in a couple of different directions in terms of job function, you can set up multiple resumes. I have worked with a lot of people over the years who, let's say if you're a communications major, you might be looking at marketing positions, you might be looking at advertising positions, you might be looking at public relations positions. And it's wise, I think, to put together your resumes so that they appeal to those particular areas. And one of the things that you can do that aligns with that is when you have experiences, either work, volunteer, activity, etc., that directly connect to that kind of work, use the experience section heading and put everything together and label it. Let's say it's public relations, label it public relations experience, and put your part-time job that you had, put the fact that you were in the public relations organization at your college, and you did some volunteer public relations for the American Cancer Society. Put that all together so that the employer sees that nice chunk of stuff that's directly related to the work that you're going to be doing. And then you can put your other employment or experiences, you can use an additional employment category, and you can put the other experiences in activities. I think that's a really strong way of setting up a resume. So, transmitting your resume. Okay. Um, yeah. Most of the applications are done online, obviously, these days, unless you happen to meet a recruiter at your college or university, or you go to a job fair and encounter an actual person. So a lot of this is going to be online applying. When you are transmitting your resume, it's best to use a PDF so that your format doesn't get blown up in the transmission process and kind of look impossible to read on the other end. So that would be an advisable thing to do. Um, and also, a lot of these organizations are using these applicant tracking systems. So you also have to be concerned about, transmitting in an appropriate way. In terms of that, you can, transmit Word documents, but you need to be sure that it's going into an applicant tracking system in order to decide not to use the PDF and use the Word document. One of the ways you can tell, although you can't always tell whether your resume is going into an applicant tracking system, but one of the ways is when you're on their website, you've filled out what you have to fill out, you've uploaded your resume, and then it starts asking you about all your jobs and about all your colleges, where you've done this, where you've done that, and you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, I just uploaded the resume. Why are you asking me for it's usually indicative that it's also going into an applicant tracking system, but not always. So that there are a lot of things these days that make it difficult for the job seeker, and that's one of them. And the other thing I think that's really difficult and unfair is that employers just they don't communicate with you anymore. It's never been easier to contact and let people know, yes, we received your resume. No, sorry, you're not moving to the second stage into the interview phase, or yes, the search is concluded and we've gone with another applicant. And back when I was in college, you used to be able to call the HR department and talk with someone. Used to be able to call recruiters and have actual conversations or email interchanges. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. It's something that makes me really angry with employers because it's never been easier to be considerate and keep your applicant base informed on what's going on. So you're kind of out there, not knowing what's happening to your interest in this particular job. So it's very frustrating, and it can get annoying and sometimes depressing. I will talk about networking next. So there's ways that you can try to find out what's going on in a certain organization that we'll talk about. Okay, page length. New graduates, unless you have an extraordinary history of involvement in work or volunteer or activities, etc., page length should be 1. Okay. Although if you are in an education or a nonprofit field, they are more tolerant of 2-page resumes. But if you're going into a business or a corporation, it should be 1 page. When you've had 5 to 10 years of experience, it's okay to go multi-page. Although I have worked with CEOs that have 1-page resumes, so it can be done. Again, you can go back to where you studied and have a conversation with someone who can look at your resume. You can also go to community colleges, by the way, because community colleges, they have a philosophy of serving the people who live in their area. Up here in Dutchess County, New York, we have Dutchess County Community College, they will talk to anyone who needs help because they all see them as possibly prospective students at some point, whether they're, older adults or, typical college age people, they will happily, work with them. So that's another alternative. Okay, fonts. I'm a fan of Times New Roman and Garamond. Okay, and those are the recommended fonts for resumes. If you use Comic Sans, it kind of tells me, well, okay, maybe I don't know. It just looks like something that projects a fun image. And maybe if you were going into travel and tourism or kind of a fun-oriented, field, that would be okay. But the standard is, more conservative in terms of the font usage. So I would, yeah, when in doubt, go with Times New Roman or Garamond. References. In the United States, we don't put references on the resume itself. I see a lot of that going on. It's just not our culture. In our culture, we put the resumes on a separate sheet of paper. The references. We label it references. We put the name, the person's title, the name of their organization, their physical address, their telephone number, and their email address. And we set that up a separate page and we send it along with the resume. European countries, and I know a little here and there about Europe. I don't know really about Far Eastern countries, but they will put the references right on the resume itself. And other cultures will put a photograph on the resume, which we don't do in the United States, because it gives away information to the employer that they're not supposed to be considering when making decisions about who to interview and who to hire. Okay. So I would avoid photographs as well. Okay, so cover letter. I believe in them. I think you should always send a cover letter when applying for a job, unless the ad says no cover letters or resumes only. People will say, yeah, they don't read them. I'm like, yeah, they do. Not everyone reads them, but you don't know who the person is who's going to be looking at your materials. And if it is a person who takes the cover letter seriously, you want them to have one. Okay. Uh, and I think it's not that difficult to set up your own sample of a cover letter and then just adjust the content when you sent it out. And it also, a lot of people will have resumes done for them by other people or by staffing organizations, but most people write their own cover letters. So it is a way for you to speak to the prospective employer in your own language and to let them see how you handle language and the choices that you make in terms of what to say. Maybe Roberts, we could do a cover letter workshop at some point. Okay, applicant tracking systems is now a very expedient way for employers to handle the resumes, sometimes hundreds of resumes that come in for one position. Get them all analyzed quickly so that they only get the candidates that meet their needs as exactly as possible. There are some limitations to these systems. Right now, these systems do not recognize columns. They don't recognize icons. They don't recognize dialogue boxes. So over the years, as we have had technology available to set up resumes and make them look really cool with all these different blocks and columns and all kind of stuff, very visually attractive, it's not going to survive the applicant tracking system. So the wisdom these days is do a standard text-based resume when you are submitting either online or you're sending in to an organization through their generic, sorry, lost my word, email, for their generic email address. If you are asked to send a resume to an actual person's email address, you can send your fancy one because that's not how the can tracking systems work. Okay. And the other part of the wisdom now is use that text-based resume when you're sending it in, and you assume there's going to be an applicant tracking system. If you get invited for an interview, you can then bring along with you copies of, your more beautiful resume with all of those enhancements. Okay, I'm just going to show you a little video clip here because there are some other things to be cognizant of when you're working with these. We got the ad. This is not it. Here it is.
We also can't hear its audio.
Yeah, right now we can't hear it.
Can you see it?
We can see it. And right now we can read the subtitles, it looks like. Deidre, right now we don't have the audio. Maybe this is like a resource that we can email to everyone along with like the
All right,
presentation and
hang
Word.
on. So you're not seeing this?
We can see it, but we can't hear it, and it's a little hard to read the subtitles. So maybe it's
Oh,
something we can share, when we send out the resources after today's event. But it's
okay. I wonder why you wouldn't be able to hear it. That's odd. Okay, so maybe you could provide everyone with the link so that they could take a look at it?
yeah, definitely.
Okay. Oh, sorry about that. And it was so loud on my end that I could barely hear what you were saying. So, okay. All right. Moving on. Networking, one of my favorite topics. Uh, the definition is the action or process of interacting with others to exchange information and develop professional or social contacts. Okay. Most people these days think of, oh, I'm looking for a job. I need a job in 3 months. I have to start networking. I would encourage you to define networking as something you should begin to do as soon as as soon as you can have an intelligent conversation with someone. And probably that would be high school. Yeah. Start thinking about networking that early. Why? Because it takes time to develop networking contacts. You can't develop, you can contact people when you're looking for work, you need that job in 3 months, but you don't have an actual relationship with that person. You can't develop that kind of relationship in that time. So I think it's very important to think about networking as early as possible, and begin to engage in it. And all networking is having conversations with people to learn something new, right? When you start your networking with, I need a job in 3 months. Do you know of any jobs that I could apply for? um it does two things. It's not the right way to network, in my opinion, and it also puts some stress on the person that you're networking with. All of a sudden you're asking them for something that they might not have, and that makes us, as people that you're networking with, feel kind of guilty and not know what to do. No, gee, I'm sorry, I don't know of any jobs. And that kind of truncates the conversation. Whereas if you approach it as, if you're talking to someone who's actually doing a job close to what you would be applying for, if you start that conversation with, I'd really like to know more about how you got into this line of work. What path did you take? What things were important for you to do? And how did you implement your job search? It's much better to start with less direct questions that are designed to elicit information. And I'm going to give you some. Okay, so you will know about a couple of those before you start networking. And you can do networking anywhere anytime, any place, as long as there's another person present. And I don't know how many of you have heard of the theory of 6 degrees of separation, which says you are connected to what you want in life by only 6 people on the planet. And the job is to, contact as many and talk to as many people as possible, because one of those people may be the person that is the first in that chain of 6 that's going to get you where you need to go. And in the 48 years that I've been doing college career development, I've seen that happen over and over again. Like the student who's flying to Aruba for spring break and starts talking with the gentleman across the aisle. And suddenly, an internship comes her way at that organization. Or the Marist University student who's taking the train every day down to New York City for her internship, and the same woman sits next to her every time. The woman finally asks her, "What are you doing on your laptop?" And she starts talking about her senior project. And the woman is one of the vice presidents down at Citigroup in New York City. And guess where she goes to work? Her first job after college. I uncovered a job opening standing in the express line at the grocery store when I came out of graduate school. I started complaining about how long it was taking. And we started talking. "Oh, who are you?" "I just came out of my master's program looking for a job." "Oh, what kind of job?" "Oh, something in student personnel administration on the college level." "Oh," she said, "my daughter is about to submit her resignation at this particular college. And maybe you should talk to her." Like, in those days, you actually called them on the phone. I applied, didn't even get an interview, but still, it's good to broadcast what you're looking for at every possible opportunity. Okay. Really, and then the first step in networking is to clarify if you're networking for job search, and there are 2 different kinds of networking. There are networking for career information, like those of us who really don't know where we'd like to move in terms of our career, or we want to change career, but we're not quite sure, what that change is going to look like. We network for career information, and then there's networking for job information. When you're networking for job information, you need to clarify your goals first. Okay. If you don't know where you're going, then that conversation can't have as much power or result for you. So you want to make sure you've got your job goals and your job target clarified. Then you have to perfect what we call your elevator pitch. And this is particularly important when you are in kind of random situations, like, the woman in front of me in the grocery store line. You need to be able to talk to someone about yourself for 1 minute, you know, um, what your goals are, where you'd like to go in terms of your career, what your work-related interests are, what some of your skills are. You can write that out to begin with, but then you need to kind of memorize it so that you can talk about it in any circumstance that you happen to be in, when you might need to transmit that information to someone. It's real important. It's especially important if you're going to a job fair where you're going to be talking to lots of different employers, to be able to start that conversation and talk about yourself. It's also good practice for that much feared interview question, "Tell me about yourself." For that, you can also use your 1 minute commercial, or we also call it the elevator pitch. Okay. When you're starting to think about networking, think about friends, family, family of friends, friends of family, your neighbors. It's easier to get started with people that you already know, and have that close connection with. And then you can move out, to classmates, faculty at your college, administrators, previous employers, etc., doctors, dentists, everyone that you come into contact with. I taught for many years a job search readiness course, and I would have in my class everybody, each one person at a time, talk about what their ideal job was going to be, coming out of college. And then I would ask the class, "Who knows someone who's in this career field that might be able to help?" And these hands would go up, and my students were just amazed that in this group of 30, people that they never thought would have any potential for helping them get the job that they wanted. All of a sudden, there's 8 hands going up of people who know. You don't know who everybody else knows. So it's important not to make assumptions when you are connecting with people. I find also the assumption that people make is if they're not in the geographic area that you want the job, there's no sense in networking with them. Man, this is a global society. I know people in career development across this country, so don't limit yourself by only talking to people in certain, geographic areas. You can also go to, alumni of high school and college. You can also contact your college or university because most of them have alumni networks now that you can use to identify folks. And I just want to pull out a little bit because we were talking before about how to get information about what's going on with your application, in a certain organization. I think the first thing when you see a job you want to apply for, the first thing you should do if you have access to an alumni network is to check that network and find out if there's an alum who is either currently working for or has worked for or has interned for that organization in the past. And then I would contact that individual and see if we could talk about what their experience was like. I'm going to be applying for a position here. I'm really interested in, how this has worked for you. What's the culture like at this organization? How did you find your job? Is there any information that you think would be really important for me to put in my resume or cover letter? I think that's the first thing you should do when you're, thinking about applying for a job. So that networking can definitely help. And also the random contacts is, I think, a good way to go as well. Um, Networking can be scary for those of us who are more introverted. Okay. Um, Thought I had a list of questions. There they are. Okay, coming up. All right, hang on. I haven't given this in a year. Okay. First thing to think about is, how to ask for help. And this next slide will help because it has a lot of good questions designed to elicit information. Also, many people are uncertain as to what they should say if they're emailing someone to ask if they have time, to talk about and give them some advice and guidance on their job search. The easiest thing is just to identify yourself, tell them how you found out about them, indicate that you are job hunting in this particular field. You're not asking for them for a job, but you would like to know, how they got into their job and what their career path was all about, and any advice that they might, be able to give you about how to implement your job search. I think it's a good idea to have a business card because we don't walk around with resumes every day. But a long time ago, I was at a job fair and I saw a student who had a foldable business card, a little business card size thing that was folded in half and had name and contact information on. And then on the inside, there was this little synopsis of her resume. I thought, how cool is that? You just give this card to someone that you've just had a conversation with on the train, at a job fair or at a networking event or anywhere else you might meet someone. And suddenly they've got information about you and a little bit about your work history and other things that you've been doing with your life. So I think that's a great idea. Networking, you should always send a thank you note to them, thanking them for their help. And you should always follow up. If you ask them, to give you some feedback on the resume, but you haven't heard from them, follow up with them, and I think it's really important and very helpful with follow up if you set up a simple spreadsheet, who you talk to, when you talk to them, their name, their contact information, their position title, a very brief synopsis of what you talked about and any action steps that you have to take as a result of that conversation. Because if you do that, um, this will become a group of people that you can stay connected with and that might be very useful for you a little further on in your career. And now you have all of their email addresses at the ready. And let's say you've networked with 25 people and finally you get the job. You send an email address out to all 25 of those people saying, thank you very much for being part of the process that got me into this job. I still have students that I knew, what, 30, 40 years ago, who let me know that they're making a job change and, can I help them in any way? Or they tell me when they're getting married, or they tell me when they're, when they've advanced in their careers. People love that sort of thing. You're in a very sympathetic, role. You're someone who needs help, and most people that you ask for help will do the best they can to give you some support, that for what you want to achieve. Okay. Um, yes, because many people will say, I'll be bothering them. They don't have time for me. I've talked with so many people over my career, and I frequently will check it out. And I say, if a student contacts you, would you be willing? Oh, yes, of course. I'd love to talk to someone, and if I don't have time, I might be able to just answer some email questions that they send to me, or we may be able to have like a 10-minute chat if I can't do a half an hour. People definitely want to help. Okay, what questions do you have? We're coming near the end of our time. This is a nice list of questions that generate really good information, but you'll notice that none of these questions say, do you know of a job that I can apply for? So, may I leave a copy of my resume with you is important, and the feedback on the resume is important. Although if you show your resume to 10 different people, you're probably going to get 10 different opinions on what should be done with it, which makes it very difficult for job seekers, and resume writers these days. So you have to sort of, get a consensus of opinions and go with that. This last one, extremely important. Never leave a networking contact without attempting to get another person to talk to. It's an old-fashioned, sales approach. If you're not going to buy my knives, could I have the names of a couple of your friends who you think might buy my knives? It's very important to get another connection. Whoa, we're done. Look at that.